And knowing that, knowing therefore the power and the strength that a PBSP can actually bring to a country, suddenly was falling on my lap. Again, I did not search for it. Again, I did not look for it. But this crazy God really just surprises you every step of the way. Yung hindi mo aasahan, I mean, background, social development. I mean, I have a few little businesses here and there, but not managing 260, a company or an organization composed of 260 companies. My board are the top CEOs of this country, very successful businessmen, and I have to report to these guys. And suddenly I find myself, why me? Ask myself again, why me? And let me show you my journey there. Because when I started in PBSP, one of the things they told me was, it's been 40 years. When I entered, it was in 2010, August of 2010, just about 3 years from now. By next month, 3 years already. And one of the things they were asking me is that for over 40 years, over 4 decades, PBSP has been really the platform for corporate contribution, for collective corporate contribution. Of course, many generous people like Mr. Escalera has been doing it also for a very long time, and many like him have actually done many things for many people and have touched so many people's lives. But beyond the individual giving, there was the idea of collective giving, and that's where PBSP came into the picture in 1972. I think it also started because, yeah, businessmen are disturbed by what they see. Businessmen are seeing poverty, seeing all of these things that are happening all over the country. And the disturbance allows for a response to actually happen. And in 1970, a group of businessmen, and guys like Mr. Sisip, Howard D., Job, and then I think Ambassador Benitan, all of these guys, just said, there's very little that we can do individually, but there is a need for us to collectively work together and put resources together. And that's when it started. And it really just started as that. Want to give, use our philanthropy money, and they agreed that we allocate 1% of net income before tax to charity work, to projects all over the country. 1%. And so they did. And after 40 years, they asked me, when I came in, we want you to look at what's happening in PBSP and answer the question, why after 40 years? Why after 40 years, all of the work and all of the money that we put into PBSP and into this country, why does it seem it's like a drop in the bucket? How come poverty continues to exist? How come problems haven't been solved? So I looked into PBSP, and really what came out is really that. Even as you now put a lot of resources collectively, and it runs to the millions, if not tens of millions at that time in 70, but a lot of money. But still, when you look at it and you address problems here and there, 1% of net income before tax, even combined by several companies, at that time about 50 companies, is nowhere close to the size of the problems they were trying to address. And of course, business at that time was just seeing philanthropy as the only means to actually help. Diba? Earn profit, based on excess profit, 1% set aside, philanthropy, charity, give. Nothing in exchange. I mean, diba? Generosity is pure generosity. But yeah, it's 1% of net income before tax. And the size of the problem that they're trying to address is just so much bigger. Let's take our present day situation. Diba? Investment grade. We know companies are doing great these days. Country is growing immensely. Government hasn't seen so much money in their coffers for the long time. It's really really beaming insofar as the economy is concerned. If you just look at the lens of the country, if businessmen will just look at the lens of the country by the growth scorecards and the growth of their company, their income, their revenue, if they're just going to look at that lens, we're really one of the best. In fact, diba, sinabi nga in the region, even beat China in the first quarter of this year. However, if you begin to look at it in another lens, then we should be bothered again. Then we should be disturbed again. Now, how come, in spite of all this growth, poverty has not changed? So I look at this situation, and when I read these things on paper, sabi ko, ayan na naman yung pattern. Ayan na naman yung pattern of disturbance. Now, how come, after all the things, good things that we have done, put reforms, etc., yeah, and it moved the country, it moved a lot of companies, goods and services are given, but at the same time, how come there's just so much more people that are left behind? The President talks about the need for business or for growth to be more inclusive. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, this is going to be part of the SONA on Monday. The challenge now for business is for us to really see beyond philanthropy, how can our businesses actually be part of the change that needs to happen? How can our core businesses actually integrate the base of the pyramid market as well as the base of the pyramid producers into the system, into the whole ecosystem of our companies? And I think Mr. Escaler is already an example of a company that's doing that. How? Diba? And there are many actually examples. And recently, a new I don't know, it's really not a new school of thought, but there are many terms that have been used other than inclusive growth. No? The whole idea of triple bottom line, of people, power, people, planet, profit, sustainable business, strategic corporate social responsibility. Recently, the strategy gurus of Harvard, Michael Porter and Mark Kramer, coined this term, creating shared value. This new idea of that as companies create value, as companies create wealth, the challenge of every company is to figure out how do you now allow for the wealth that's created to be shared better, to be shared more to people. And ayun nga, parang this thinking sort of came up in 2011. In a way, naging very, it was a response, according to them, it was a response in a discussion in the World Economic Forum when because of the economic crisis that was happening globally, there was a question of how come companies are unable to really address poverty in a very significant way. And that's when they started thinking, and in a way this was actually started by the CEO of Nestle, Global Nestle, when he said, why will I take? Why will I give back when I'm not taking anything away from the people that Nestle is helping? Of course, that's his mindset. But in broader sense, what he's essentially saying was, in Nestle, it is in the DNA of Nestle, or it is in the corporate DNA and corporate culture of Nestle, to actually look at our business as a response to society's needs wherever we are. So that when we produce milk, we are not just producing milk. Our mind, our lens is about nutrition. It's about nutrition for kids that need the proper vitamins, minerals that's needed for them to become healthy. So you look at that setup, and sabi nila, yeah, no, I mean, if you look at business and you look at the value chain of business, in each level of the chain, there's value and money that's made. There's value and money that's made. Unfortunately, for many decades, probably centuries, the way capitalism has operated is really focused on one scorecard, and that is the scorecard of profit. Nothing wrong with profit, but in the end, once profit is generated, the question is, how is profit shared? Or how does the value of things happening throughout the value chain of companies actually redound to the benefit of many other people? And they talk about three ways of doing shared value. First, reconceiving products and markets. What does this mean? Knowing, for instance, that the vast majority of our population are the low-income people with purchasing power of this much, how can we make milk more accessible to these people at a price that is more affordable? So we need to reconceive our products for it to be more accessible to these people. So that's what Nestle does. They have a Nido brand, or they have the premium milk that is in the that is already put in the refrigerated counters of supermarkets. But in the dry goods areas, they have Bear brand. Or in the sari-sari store, it's a Bear brand sachet. They reconceive products that makes it more accessible, knowing that if the kid consumes a Bear brand milk, they get the same nutrition that they will get from buying a Nido brand. Mr. Pangilinan, in one of the forums on inclusive growth that we talked about, he said, there is no choice for business not to reinvent products, or else the growth of the companies will also not happen. If they did not invent Pasalode, if they did not make the SIM card cheaper, they will not control the prepaid market of this country. And the growth will really just be static if they just limited it to the few who can afford the postpaid plan. So they needed to reinvent the product using the same platform, using the same system, for them to be able to make communication more accessible to the vast majority of our people. And I think from the last I heard, on a daily basis, easily about 2 billion text messages a day are transmitted. You should just translate that to a peso per text. It's 2 billion a day, probably even more. But it allows for our people to communicate. Whereas before, di ba, our problem is, when can you put that landline in my house? Now, communication is democratized. Why? Because a company dared to reinvent their product. Redefining productivity in the value chain precisely. Mr. Escalier, classic example. You farm out production to farmers who do not have a sense of market. Diba? Let me show a very complete example of that also. No? Jollibee, same thing also. Jollibee has now started to integrate in their supply chain to purchase the onions that they need for their burgers, to actually work closely with farmers' cooperatives to be able to directly purchase, so that the margins of the supply chain redound to better incomes to onion growers. But it takes Jollibee to partner with the Catholic Relief Service group to actually organize the farmers to be able to transact business in a very professional way. Because it's not easy. We have stories of pole vaulting, we have stories of people not honoring contracts, or farmers not honoring contracts. Therefore, there is a need to actually prepare farmers and groups to actually do the business with big business. And government providing the financing. So you can see there's a whole important need for different stakeholders and different groups to actually find unity in solving a particular problem. Same thing is happening with Nestle. Nestle said that their current domestic procurement of coffee, which is the Robusta coffee, is about 30% domestic and 70% global. Suddenly they realize, if we do not address our domestic procurement now, there is a threat that when production in Vietnam or in other countries where they source most of their coffee beans fall down, then we are vulnerable to actually produce the kind of stocks that we need to address the market that we need to address here. So it is a business imperative for them to actually increase their domestic procurement. And in doing so, they are forced to also work with the farmers. Our television networks. This is the third aspect of creating shared value, this whole idea of cluster development. They define cluster development as essentially relating your business with the environment where you're operating, or relating your business to the society or the people that are part of your business. So, you know very well that whenever typhoons and disasters happen, all major network stations drop everything and they go into relief effort, communication, telethons, diba? And they even actually provide rescue services, which is not necessarily core business. But why do they do this? Because they know that their core business is the power of communication to inform people of where help is needed, using your core business to actually address very specific problems. They spend money, yes. But what do they get in return? Viewer loyalty. It's not all give. There's a lot of give and take these days. But that's how it can be sustainable. That's how all of these things can actually continue to happen, because nothing is lost. There are new ways, in other words, of doing business. Let me share to you a challenge that in a way we're trying to address in PBSP right now. This is tuberculosis control. PBSP became a recipient of a huge grant from Global Fund and USAID. We're managing for the next 3 to 5 years a budget of about 48 million euros from Global Fund and another 28 million US dollars from USAID. Huge money. And this is actually money that we use to actually fund the entire delivery system of the Department of Health for tuberculosis control. This is aid money. No? And PBSP has also developed a reputation to actually have the ability to absorb and manage funds, no, to aid money to actually use for development projects in different parts of the country. And here we fund mostly setting up of laboratories, setting up diagnostic centers, and also giving medicines for free. Are you aware that tuberculosis still is a problem in this country? About 80 people still die of tuberculosis every day in this country. Not only because of the basic tuberculosis strain, but also due to this, what they're calling the multi-drug resistant TB. People who do not complete the cycle of 6 months develop a resistance for the medicine and eventually creates another strain that is not anymore curable by the basic TB medicine. And once it becomes drug resistant, the treatment on a per patient basis is anywhere from 250 to 300,000 per patient. And we're funding that through the grant that's being given to us. But thinking about it, when I came to BBSP and this project was shown to us, the question I asked myself is, okay, after 5 years, or after 4 years after doing this program, how are we going to fund this? What is going to be the country's delivery mechanism and financing mechanism to allow for TB to actually be controlled? Because if you don't stop it, it will just come back, and it will come back again with a vengeance. So the challenge is, how do you make a system sustainable? And this is where, again, the whole idea of working closely with different players. Because of the grants, we're able to capacitate DOH. Because of the grants, we're able to capacitate NGOs working in tuberculosis. Because of the grants, we're able to work closely with private hospitals to actually also provide services that eventually redound to the treatment of our patients. But this is a whole system that costs so much money. And one of the discussions we're having with Secretary Ona in the Department of Health is To what extent can we actually do a public-private partnership in addressing TB control? Is there a way? Again, is there a new way of doing things? PhilHealth. Diba? PhilHealth is now actually aggressively trying to get as many beneficiaries and subscribers to the fund. And if we're able to set up the mechanism, clearly PhilHealth becomes a possible financier of all of these things. But then we need to go through the exercise of really studying what does it take, or what is the actuarial to determine the kind of fund that needs to be set up in PhilHealth to be able to fund a possible PPP system. Or even if it's just government, but how? How do we fund it? So all of these things are business challenges. All of these things are, something that, I'm not good at. But these are things that are clearly challenges for businesses, companies that are in the healthcare business. No? Shared value is essentially the discussion on really finding the sweet spot of profit and social impact. Because companies, whether we like it or not, will not give up the need for profit. Because they need to address shareholder value. Still, we cannot get out of that, unfortunately, because that's how capitalism works. I invest, I need a return. And therefore, the whole challenge is how do we convince shareholders that we're not really compromising your return by doing something that addresses social impact also. And part of it is precisely the necessity to address social issues, because if we don't, then it also affects the financial bottom line in the long run. As in the case of Nestle, if our domestic procurement is compromised because of situations globally insofar as coffee production, then that's going to affect our financial bottom line. There is business sense in doing something for others. And these are the things, and these are the new challenges, especially in a globally open economy. By 2015, it's going to be more open in the region when ASEAN comes in onto ASEAN 2015. So all of these challenges essentially now challenges Filipino businessmen, or should challenge Filipino businessmen, to look at new ways of addressing not only social problems, but really business problems. It's all intertwined. In other words, what they're saying, it's all so intertwined that you cannot not look at the social situation and how society will impact your business, even your financial bottom lines. Of course, it's easier said than done. Last May, I attended a conference on shared value in Boston, Massachusetts. And Mark Kramer, one of the authors of this thing, mentioned in one of his speeches, or in one of his, I paraphrased this no, because it was an extemporaneous thing that he said, in the journey of convincing companies to take the creating shared value track, or the creating shared value journey, we need to recognize that there will be tensions in doing that, because it's difficult to get out of comfort zones. It's very difficult to get out of the comfort zone of what works, what brings profit to the maximum level that we can show our shareholders that this is the way to go. Because once you disturb them, once you disturb the businessman, they say, you might want to revisit your model. Because if you don't, then these are your risks. If you don't, this is the impact on society. If you don't disturb them, then you have to be able to convince them that it's, by disturbing them, you're not actually threatening what they're looking for insofar as profit maximization on a long-term basis. And he said, it's going to be a tension. Because there are strongly held views, especially the more successful CEOs. Why fix it? Diba? Why fix something that is not broken? Diba? The common thing, a common cliche in business. But the challenge is precisely look at what is happening to the environment. Not only the ecology, but what is happening to society. More people are just getting left behind, not only here in the Philippines, but globally. The gap between those who have and have not it's just getting wider. And therefore, let me share to you, when he said this, I sort of wrote in my journal. Actually, I have a very private blog that I don't share to everybody because I don't want, but let me just share to you one of the posts that I said, that I wrote out of this thing. No? And again, this part of this whole discerning of what this is really all about. No? So, finding you in the tensions of our lives. You, of course, meaning God. Tensions, in essence, are really symptoms of differences of opinions, views, and beliefs between or among us who live in this very complex world. And it is these differences, if not resolved or respected, that lead to very damaging, if not violent, conflicts that divide us in our relationship with family, friends, co-workers, and the community at large. Often we avoid addressing these tensions for fear of hurting the other person who has a contrary view than ours, or simply because we just do not wish to get entangled in the uncomfortable feeling that conflict creates. When we choose this safe posture, we in effect allow the status quo to prevail, even if deep in our hearts we know that change must happen. I have to admit that for quite some time I've been guilty of this sin of inaction and apathy. Lately, however, I have had very little choice but address tensions among the people in my workplace and the various stakeholders of major programs we are involved in. I realize that reforms we want to institute in our organization and the country will not prosper if the people tasked to play specific roles do not see eye to eye on how they can work and relate with each other to pursue our common goals for change. I have also witnessed tensions in family situations that are causing undue strains on relationships among husband and wife, parents and children, siblings, cousins, and extended family. I've seen how these unresolved tensions have led to irreconcilable differences and separations where no one wins. In all these, what I have learned is the importance of listening. And I mean listening without the noise of our personal biases that deafen us from discovering where the other person is coming from. Listening, therefore, demands that we again put our personal interests aside and make the extra effort to again concern ourselves with what and how the other person feels. It is actually amazing how listening can be a very humbling experience if both conflicting parties are good listeners. Often we discover that we all have good reasons and points to substantiate our respective held positions and opinions, views and beliefs. And when we allow ourselves to sum up all our collective good points of views, then and only then can we get the real problem solving to happen. In instances when either party just refuses to listen, we should just strive to respectfully agree to disagree for the time being. I believe mutual respect is the sacred space we should give ourselves to allow our respective journeys to still unfold, where new experiences can lead us to new crossroads of discernment and choices. And who knows, our paths could just converge in God's time. Disturbances, tensions. I think this is what my Ateneo education has given me. It has taught me to be a man for others. It has taught me to strive for the magis. To be man for others is to be allowed to be disturbed. To allow yourself, to allow your heart to be disturbed. To strive for the magis, we have to confront our limitations. We have to